Good afternoon, everyone. I am Peter Celentano. I'm a new member of the AEO team as an event coordinator here, helping out on the webinar today and serving as your host. So I want to welcome you all to today's webinar, Empowering Native American Entrepreneurs, Honoring Heritage, and Advancing Economic Opportunities, part of AEO's Equity and Opportunity for All series. We are absolutely thrilled to have you all with us to celebrate Native American Heritage Month and discuss the vital role of Native entrepreneurs in fostering economic equity and sustainability. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items. So today's session will be recorded and will be shared with our attendees afterwards. Feel free to use the Q&A feature. We have a lot of content packed in today's schedule, so we may not have time to get to questions, but we'll be sure to capture those and hopefully be able to follow up with you afterwards within email. We will also, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see that Q&A for our panelists. So feel free to submit there, and we'll aim to address as many as we can if we have time or afterwards. One more housekeeping item to ensure a smooth experience. Please remain on mute throughout the event. Just one more reminder, we'll also be sharing links to some resources and the newly released Native American Small Business Fact Sheet from AEO in the chat during the session. So please be mindful of those links as they drop in during various parts. And I think we're ready to get started. So I want to first introduce Natalie Madeira-Cofield, our president and CEO of the Association for Enterprise Opportunity. Under Natalie's leadership, AEO has been a leading advocate for underserved entrepreneurs across the country, creating pathways for equitable economic opportunity. And without further ado, I want to introduce Natalie here. I'm going to bring right to the front of the screen.
Thank you, Peter, and welcome all. It is a pleasure and an honor to join you in a eventist moment today to talk about Native American entrepreneurs. As Peter mentioned, I am the president and CEO of the Association for Enterprise Opportunity, and I'm delighted to welcome you to today's webinar, Empowering Native Entrepreneurs, Honoring Heritage and Advancing Economic Opportunities. This event is part of our ongoing Equity and Opportunity for All series, which serves as a vital platform to discuss economic equity and opportunity within the small business community. And more importantly, this particular webinar focuses and celebrates Native American Heritage Month. Since our founding in 1991, AEO has been the leading national association for small business development in the United States, representing organizations and providers that support the nearly 33 million small businesses in the country and counting. Our mission is simple yet powerful: to create economic opportunity for underserved entrepreneurs throughout the United States of America. We support over 2,700 member organizations, ranging from business support organizations to lenders, by providing advocacy, research, and capacity building resources. One of our flagship initiatives, the Business Health Assessment, BAH, addresses critical financial and operational gaps for small businesses. Since our founding nearly 35 years ago, we have been responsible for informing and advocating for policies that have provided more than $1 billion in resources to entrepreneurial ecosystems across the country. Our partnerships with government agencies, corporate entities, and philanthropic organizations are crucial to advancing the needs of underserved entrepreneurs. In addition to our day-to-day efforts and our Equity and Opportunity for All webinar series, AEO hosts impactful events like our AEO Talks, our regional councils, and various conferences, as well as our Data to Dialogue research conversation series, which brings to life a number of the thought-leading and policy-provoking research reports that AEO has produced. Today's webinar offers a platform to discuss economic equity and opportunity in the Native American business community. It is essential to recognize and support the remarkable contributions of Native American entrepreneurs. They play a crucial role in driving community development, with Native American-owned businesses generating over $67 billion annually to the United States economy. Native entrepreneurs are a growing force in both rural and urban areas, lending businesses across various sectors such as retail, agriculture, arts, and technology, among countless others. Since 2012, the number of Native-owned businesses has grown by 47%, more than double the overall business growth rate in the United States. Further emphasizing this contribution, AEO is proud to release a new fact sheet on Native American business ownership. This publication highlights the contributions of Native-owned enterprises, the unique challenges that Native entrepreneurs face, and the support systems necessary for continued growth and success. If you haven't already, I encourage you to download the fact sheets and explore the valuable insights that they provide. And I know the team will be providing links to the fact sheet throughout today's discussion. At AEO, in conclusion, we're committed to advocating for Native American entrepreneurs, ensuring that they have the resources and supports needed to thrive. And we invite all stakeholders, policymakers, and members of the public to join us in these efforts. By supporting Native entrepreneurs, we can help create a more inclusive and equitable business environment for everyone. To get this webinar started today, it is my pleasure to introduce AEO Senior Research Associate, Dr. Lori Smith, who will share a research presentation on the current landscape of Native entrepreneurship and set the stage for an insightful discussion with leading experts and advocates. Lori, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much, Natalie. I'm Lori Smith, and I'm absolutely honored to be here. We have an incredible panel, and I know our expert panel will cover a lot of ground, so I'm just going to start by presenting some key data points and some context to help set the stage for that discussion. So first of all, you can find more data in our recently released fact sheet, as Natalie just shared. And for additional insights, please also visit our research website at AEO, where we have reports and interactive dashboards with business data across various geographies and demographic groups. And we really want to develop, new resources to support your work. So we would absolutely love to hear what you all are doing and what things you would like to see in terms of data and research. So please do reach out to us at research@aeoworks.org to talk about anything related to research. So now the main takeaways of my presentation are, first of all, to talk about the importance of entrepreneurship in Native communities and why this matters. And I'll show that there are still significant gaps, and we'll discuss what is needed to address these gaps to empower Native communities across the country. But first, I'll just start with some context on Native communities. So first, let's start with a quick introduction to tribal nations. I know that many of you are already familiar with this, but I want to make sure that we start with a baseline understanding before our discussion. So first, federally recognized tribal nations are sovereign political entities acknowledged by the US government. So the status establishes a government-to-government relationship. And tribal nations have their own governments, their own constitutions, their own elections, and their own rules for citizenship. And each is unique, and their systems vary from tribe to tribe. Here is like a really incredible introductory report if you would like to learn more. And currently there are 574 federally recognized tribal nations across 35 states. And when it comes to tribal geographies, many people think first about reservations, but there are really many different types. So first, Indian country with a capital C is a legal term that refers to lands under tribal jurisdiction, including reservation boundaries, dependent Indian communities, and individual allotments. So federal American Indian reservations are just one type of geography under tribal jurisdiction. So here in this map from the Census Bureau in green, you can see the federal American Indian reservations in green and off-reservation trust lands. And then in dark purple, you have state American Indian Native reservations. And the US Census Bureau also identifies additional tribal geographies, such as the Oklahoma tribal statistical areas. So these are the light areas that represent tribes without reservation lands in Oklahoma. And also the Alaska Native village statistical areas, and these are shown in light purple. And in total, there are 334 federally and state recognized reservations across the US. And these areas, combined with other tribal geographies, represent over 100 million acres of land. That's a landmass roughly the size of the fourth largest US state. But it's important to remember that not all tribes have reservations. So for example, Alaska has 228 federally recognized tribal nations, but only one federal reservation. So understanding the range of geographies is really essential. And now before discussing this in terms of racial identity, let's start with some important context. So American Indians and Alaska Natives are descendants of America's original inhabitants and are recognized as sovereign entities, not based on race, but based on inherent rights. So this is the distinction that forms the foundation of the nation-to-nation relationship with the federal government. But for data purposes, racial self-identification is commonly used and approaches vary significantly. So these differences can impact findings and advocacy efforts. So it's always important to be mindful of how we measure and interpret data, and especially as these different categories used by the Census Bureau change in terms of self-identification. So here, for example, is the way that the American Indian and Alaska Native population is often categorized based on racial self-identification using the new 2024 Office of Management and Budget Standards. And here this map shows the distribution of the American Indian and Alaska Native population in the census ACS data. And as expected, there's not a one-to-one mapping with the tribal geographies we just saw, but there is a clear correlation. And even if we were to just use the population located in tribal geographies, we wouldn't have just American Indian, Alaska Natives in these populations. We will have different people outside of that category as well. So it's really important to be mindful of what we're measuring as we work with different data sources. And of course, and so there are many ways to measure this population, and another way to measure the population is in terms of enrollment or looking at enrolled members of tribal nations. But to work with this data, you need to build a relationship with the tribal nation. So again, it's just important to be mindful of these differences in measurement. And when working with racial identity data, a big challenge that we face as researchers is simply working to make sure that this population is included in analysis. So the American Indian and Alaska Native population is often simply left out due to small sample sizes, which are thought to lead to more imprecise estimates. But there are ways that we can and we should use this data responsibly to make sure that the AIAN population is represented. So on the left here is a really great resource for approaching data equity in your research. So I encourage you to check out this report. And then I also want to highlight that a lot of great work has come about through partnerships with tribal nations and federal agencies through the Center for Indian Country Development, or the CICD, at the Minneapolis Federal Reserve. And at AEO, we really want to advocate to make sure that everyone counts. So we would always love to discuss how to approach your analyses or how to advocate for representation in major public data sets. So now let's talk about the scale of Native entrepreneurship. So Native-owned businesses represent a very significant and growing segment of the US economy. According to census data, there are over 400,000 Native-owned businesses, creating more than 300,000 jobs. And these businesses span diverse industries, from tourism to renewable energy. And these are cornerstones of communities, driving local reinvestment and opportunities. And looking at these trends over time, we see really remarkable growth in Native entrepreneurship. In our own analysis of census data, we found that the number of Native-owned businesses grew by 47% between 2012 and 2020, with 2020 being the latest year for which data are available. And this is more than double the overall business growth rate of 19% over the same period. But despite this growth, there's still a significant gap. So this graph shows entrepreneurship estimates from the Minneapolis Federal Reserve and CICD, looking specifically at employer entrepreneurship rates, or for larger businesses with 10 or more employees using population data. So the green line shows the entrepreneurship rate for the American Indian Alaska Native individuals, and the gray line shows the entrepreneurship rate for all individuals. And so what stands out to you here? Well, two things stand out to me. And so first, you do see that the gap has been narrowing over this period since 2018, but look at what happened in 2020. We see that Native-owned businesses were really disproportionately affected by the pandemic, experiencing about a 40% decline. And this really highlights the need for inclusive recovery programs and increased capital access. And in the wake of the pandemic, demonstrating this gap did actually help to contribute to support advocacy efforts and increase investment in tribal enterprises and small businesses in the US. So what's the challenge? There are many challenges, as always, with underserved communities. And Native entrepreneurs face unique challenges in accessing loans and capital to start and sustain their businesses. So some key challenges include distance from financial services. So many Native communities are far from banks, and the same also holds for small business development centers. So there's also a recent report showing that, for many entrepreneurs, in-person business support services are not really accessible. And then of course, there's also the digital divide and challenges accessing support online as well. Another challenge is smaller loan amounts. So most seek loans for less than 25,000, while a majority of businesses overall seek loans for over 25,000. And so while microloans are often critical for meeting entrepreneurs where they're at, challenges accessing larger amounts can also limit their ability to scale and grow their businesses. And this also tends to make underwriting more expensive for lenders. And then there's a challenge of lower approval rates. So Native applicants are less likely to secure the financing they seek due to systemic biases, lack of credit histories, and trust land limitations. So whichever way we slice the data, we'll see that Native entrepreneurs are less likely to be approved for credit. And then even when they are approved, they're less likely to be approved. They're often approved for less than the amount requested. So non-Native business owners receive all of the financing for which they applied, almost twice the rate of Native-owned businesses. And these barriers underscore the importance of addressing inequities and expanding access to capital. So in terms of creating opportunity, I'm really excited to share that there are a tremendous number of Native American financial institutions, including Native CDFIs, that have played a critical role in fostering financial inclusion and business development across the US. They provide affordable, innovative, and culturally informed financial services, credit, and capital, stepping in where mainstream banks fall short. And so here is an incredible resource also from the Minneapolis Fed showing the relationship between the location of financial institutions, Native financial institutions, and tribal geographies. And here's also a fantastic report if you would like to learn more. But scaling these innovative practices from Native financial institutions requires more resources, and with more support, these institutions can significantly expand their impact. And so I'm thrilled that we have this really incredible panel today to speak about ongoing challenges and opportunities, both in terms of policy and programming. And so in closing, I want to note that Native financial institutions serve entrepreneurs of all backgrounds. So one study by the CICD found that around just over 40% of clients are non-Native, demonstrating their broader role in fostering equity for all underserved entrepreneurs. So by learning from Native financial institutions and business support models, we can create more inclusive lending practices that benefit all entrepreneurs as well. And so more generally, the point is that when we know our programs work for underserved entrepreneurs, they truly work for all entrepreneurs. And so to delve deeper into these issues and solutions, we are fortunate to have an esteemed panel of experts with us today. It is my pleasure to introduce our panel moderator, Jackson Brossy, who will guide us through this important discussion. Jackson Brossy serves as the Assistant Administrator for the Office of Native American Affairs at the U.S. Small Business Administration. In this role, Mr. Brossy serves as a senior executive, providing executive oversight, management, leadership, and championship of Native American entrepreneurship. And before the SBA, Mr. Brossy served as executive director for both the Native CDFI network, a 501(c)(3) advocacy group, and the Navajo Nation Washington office, the official intergovernmental affairs office for the largest tribe in the nation. An advocate of access to capital and technical assistance for Native entrepreneurs, Mr. Brossy also serves on the board of Prosperity Now, Change Labs, and the Federal Reserve Bank Center for the Indian Country Development Leadership Council. He is an enrolled member of the Navajo Nation and attended Stanford University and Harvard University. Welcome, Jackson. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. Jackson Brossy does it toyek linear Belagane buses chino but ane does chedo Belagane does nala. Look at your gadan is in shadow towards hello, welcome. And that's my formal and respectful way of introducing myself in the Navajo language. And I think it's I feel good about sharing that with you all here today in Native American Heritage Month. And this great group of folks who are aligned with what I believe in, and I know that the Native CDFIs that are joined here on the panel believe in. I also enjoy introducing myself in the Navajo language because it's something that the federal government, which I work for, worked actively to prevent future generations of Native people from speaking their own language. I'm from the Navajo reservation, and I think everything that Lori shared right there is spot on about the diversity, but also a lot of the challenges. And I can speak to a lot of those challenges, like being far from a bank, and that has a tremendous impact on business and economic and enterprise opportunity. And I'm really excited that we have an incredible panel here today that can share about their expertise in this area, and also some of the challenges, but also a lot of the opportunities, and hopefully how you all can get involved in helping with this. So again, without any further ado, I want to invite the rest of the panel to introduce themselves, tell a little about your organization and what you all do, to provide some background before we go into our discussion. And I see Sean is first on my list, so Sean.
Thanks, Jackson. Again, Sean Winters. We're with Chia Shabak. We're in Dowagiac, Michigan, which is in the southwest corner, and I'm one of the few folks to get to do this. We're down in this area right here. We've been here championed by the Pokagon Band of Potawatomi Indians to serve as tribal entrepreneurs and tribal citizens in various capacities, and have been doing so since 2009. See a lot of friends, a lot of familiar names that have helped us get to where we're at, and have allowed us to do some of the things to be recognized in order to be able to sit on a panel such as this and share what we do and our impact, and hopefully continue that impact across Indian country.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Sean. And Sean's a former board member of the Native, or probably still board member of the Native CDFI Network, or I worked with him. Hand it over to Crystal, then Liz, and then Robert.
Hello, my name is Crystal Cornelius, and I am the president and CEO of the Awista Corporation. The Awista Corporation, we are the longest standing Native intermediary CDFI in the nation. Very happy that this year we're celebrating our 25th year anniversary. So our organization, essentially as an intermediary, has worked the last 25 years with Native CDFIs, tribal programs, and tribes, particularly Native CDFIs, in providing capacity building, networking, and resource to capital and investments. Very pleased to be here and looking forward to our conversation today.
Thank you, Crystal, and congratulations on the 25 years. Incredible. They've done some great things to help uplift the Native CDFI community, which I think is about 70 strong plus now. And I guess we'll get into that a little deeper. Liz, and then Robert.
Sounds good. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Liz Gamboa. I am Mexican and Apache descent, born and raised in LA, big city girl. I am the executive director of New Mexico Community Capital. I've been with the organization for a little over 6 years. We have recently celebrated 20 years as an organization, and celebrated that by opening a resilience hub, is what we're calling it. So we doubled our space, including another 4,000 square feet. And we hope to make this a community, a thriving community space in the center of downtown Albuquerque. I invite you all to come by and see it. We started off as a VC. We then were a Native CDFI, and then we got into being an accelerator / incubator through a grant, a multi-year grant for the Administration for Native Americans. And that really set us out on the path we are now, which is really specializing in small business, technical assistance, and business mentorship classes, and thriving and building digital or technical department, just thinking about all the uses there for our communities. So yeah, it's very nice to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. And Robert.
Winikisa Kwame. Good afternoon, everybody. Ntasuis Apuna Kishki Katahanet, Nuompnom Ka Nutomas Masipia. I'm Rod Maxim, and I'm a citizen of the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe, as well as a fellow at the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C., where I research tribal economies and how Native American people are in particular represented in data. In my capacity at Brookings, I've written a couple different finance and native entrepreneurship related topics, including a profile on the Mountain Plains Regional Native CFI Coalition, which is part of the Economic Development Administration's Build Back Better Regional Challenge in the Biden administration. Katapatanamu, thank you all for having me here today.
Yeah, and thank you for that, Robert. And I mentioned boarding schools and how the federal government actively worked to take away the native languages and many other things, and things that impacted entrepreneurship and business development and things like agriculture by taking kids from their homes. And while this is a really difficult subject, I also want to acknowledge that President Biden issued an official apology for a lot of the bad things that happened at boarding schools on October 25th of this year, so just recently in Arizona. And so I think, and I feel good about some of the steps we're taking to move forward. But today, we want to talk about exploring opportunities and obstacles to Native entrepreneurship. And I really want to start with the great work that OESTA is doing. I think that you all can provide a broad overview of what the unique challenges that Native entrepreneurs have, maybe the opportunities, and how Native CDFIs are working to address them and uplift these businesses.
Thank you for that, Jackson. I think I'd like to take us back just a moment to the inception of the CDFI fund. So we're going to be talking quite a bit about Native CDFIs and how they essentially act as the economic pillars within their respective tribal communities, especially promoting entrepreneurship, homeownership, and consumer lending, as well as a host of capacity building services. So the CDFI fund was created by the Clinton administration. Very fortuitously, at the same time the CDFI fund was being created, Congress, for the first time in history, issued a study to see why so many tribal communities were still experiencing perpetual poverty. And some of those questions, which concluded within this study, had to deal with some of the treaty rights. There's educational funding that is provided to tribes, as well as food and healthcare. So through the onset of this study, it was the first time Congress went across the whole United States, Alaska and Hawaii, and really did a lot of data gathering. I'm getting my D's and G's mixed up this morning. So with that, very interestingly, that study came out in 2001, and CDFI fund was created at that time. Now, what's interesting is that study showed 16 major barriers to economic development within Indian country. The first and foremost for tribes and tribal citizens was a lack of access to capital and credit, period. So that study really helped prompt CDFI fund having a set aside permanently to create Native CDFIs. So Native CDFIs, in essence, are and tend to be the economic engines of their communities, which I indicated. When we look at some of the challenges, a lot of our tribal communities are located in very rural and remote areas. So having the accessibility as you would in a larger urban area, not only for capital, but for those wraparound business development services, there's no outlet for assistance in these measures. Native CDFIs really have changed the game in this measure, again, within their communities. We know that within OESTA's portfolio, which is vast and holds, quite a bit of our Native CDFIs, and we collect amazing data from the inception of us collecting data. Our Native CDFIs have provided almost $1 billion in capital to their respective communities, 927 million. With that, they have created over 3,000 Native businesses, to be specific, 3,334, and created over 20,000 jobs. So what we find, a lot of tribes, and not necessarily all, are managing their tribal programs and other initiatives. Sometimes they don't have the funding or the resources to really help build a private sector economy to help with entrepreneurship. So Native CDFIs really have acted as the catalyst for opportunity for their respective community members to receive business loans, receive consumer loans, receive culturally relevant education that really helps build financial mobility and create assets for the first time in many of our reservation communities. Awista, throughout this history, we have walked as an intermediary the last 25 years with our CDFIs. We typically can tend to be the first investor in our CDFIs, and looking at the lack of access to capital, we still have a lack of access to investors investing within our respective communities, conventional banking institutions. And when you look at how a lot of CDFIs are capitalized to propel small business, they have a vast amount of relationships that are helping support that growth. So we still find lack of access to capital and affordable capital. That's really important, and long-term capital is really important as well. So in looking at, holistically, Awista, I believe we've revolved around 700 million within Indian country through our lending initiatives. And to date, we've had one loan default. You'll find that that's respective, and Native CDFIs are really outperforming in measures banks based on those relationships, based on the services, and honestly, based on giving any marginalized community, in our respect, it's Native communities, the access to safe and affordable financing. When we have those opportunities, we flourish and we prosper. And I think we'll hear from a lot of our members today on this panel, specific stories within that. But the Native CDFI industry itself really has created a sense of economic freedom, opportunity that Native communities haven't seen since colonization began.
Well, thank you, Crystal, and congratulations to you and the Native CDFI movement for 927 million in capital. I think that's incredible, and that makes a big difference in places where generational wealth was taken from us. And I want to ask Sean now. So Sean runs Chia Shabak, and ask you a bit where you meet with these entrepreneurs and small businesses. You're where the rubber hits the road. So can you tell us maybe an example or two of some of the businesses you work with, maybe some of the challenges and maybe some of the opportunities you see broader for this movement?
Sure. Thanks, Jackson. Sometimes I look at it as where, some of the obstacles and challenges are kind of the same, depending on how you want to look at it. And, like Dr. Mill was showing that, there has been an increase, and, you look at all the statistics that Crystal just shared. I mean, that's incredible, the amount of assistance that's gone on and how that continues to evolve. But there's also still a tremendous amount of folks that still are looking for these opportunities to start a business, to grow a business, to do so many things. There's a lot of talented, Native entrepreneurs out there. And I think some of our challenges are, locating those individuals. Even though we're very, very rooted in our communities, there's still a lot of folks that, we have yet to reach. And with that, one of the things we always try to do internally is, the loan itself is very simple, but, creating an atmosphere and an environment that are conducive to creating relationships with our tribal entrepreneurs, that, holds us accountable internally for what we're trying to do with our program. But at the same time, offering that experience, creating a trusting relationship, with each individual, to go ahead and empower them and nurture them the way that we can. So, trying to be as effective and efficient with something that we've been doing for years, but, try to refine it, try to adapt to something new, to more modern times, to, be able to relate to different age groups and different demographics within our communities. I mean, that's a challenge, an obstacle, but at the same time, it's a lot of fun because you're learning all the time. You're adapting all the time. I mean, you're always growing and doing different things, all for one purpose, which is, getting more capital into Indian country and letting our star shine. So that's really it. It sounds very simple, but it can be very tedious and very very frustrating at times. But again, if we continue to look at what we're trying to do, keeping our missions and our visions as visuals in front of us, the end product is way too important. And just knowing that step by step that the more we do this, the more we can reach, and the more that we can continue to let those folks have their day in the sun.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Sean. And I do agree with you about what you say about finding the entrepreneurs and at the Small Business Administration. I think sometimes we have that challenge as well, even though we've had an incredible uptick in different areas, like a government contract is an area where we work in, and there's been incredible growth there. The individual entrepreneurs often, like other communities that are marginalized, do not want to take on loans, and for good reason, and because we know about predatory lenders, and that's a lot of the history that we have. And so I think that it's good to have you there, and it's good to have you kind of pointing out that we need to find these entrepreneurs.
And real quick, I just also wanted to share that amongst the native CDFIs that we do have represented across the country, is it is a very close-knit, special family of organizations that is non-competitive, and everybody wants to see the best for Indian country. So the information that's shared, the networks that are created, the resources that are shared, and provided, are, go beyond just each individual organization. I mean, it truly is a nationwide family, looking out for, again, each individual, because, one at a time is a fantastic thing. And we've got so many people looking after so many people. So it's great.
Thank you, Sean. I appreciate what you're doing. And Liz, I also appreciate what you're doing in New Mexico. A lot of my family lives in New Mexico, so I go through there, and I've met with some of the entrepreneurs that you all have helped before, and also that evolution of being a CDFI to being an incubator to going into other areas, but also maintaining your mission is of interest to me, and I think of interest to the folks here. But can you tell us a bit about maybe some of the opportunities and challenges you see in your area as well? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. And we work pretty much, let's see, we are aligned with Change Labs that you know pretty well. They also have opened their new space last year, wildly successful, bustling, right? A real community center. I think some of the challenges we have really is, I feel just from maybe a top-down look, is there are a lot of resources out there, right? The SBA has a lot, SCORE has a lot, West locally has a lot. There's a lot of folks out there. Also, there are native directed programs like AIBE, and also UNM Rainforest has a native entrepreneurship program. So they're doing certain things and holding gatherings. But I would say that people are not always, the folks that we work with don't get a lot out of those programs necessarily, even though that is there as a resource. And we really want, I think what we do and what we bake into the work that we do is really more holistic. So we kind of bake in, right? We want to pave a path and really just provide an approach that honors where a person is from, like their cultural beliefs, right? And their way of doing business. Their way of doing business is not always matched to a Western model. So of course they have to make a profit. Of course they have to fix their price a certain way in order to make a profit, and, look at their, right, there's so many pieces of the business, but really, I think, Western model versus traditional cultural model, I feel it's local or regional, and that's something that we're really good at. So we go out to the various pueblos or tribes, and we offer hardware. So we give people, a digital wallet. We give them a laptop. We give them a stipend, And this all goes along with several hours of technical assistance support that happens during and after the class. They're also in a small community, right? Our classes are 15 to 20 people. We've served almost 800 people in the past probably 10 years. Various classes. We've had financial literacy classes, a basic business and marketing class. We've done the 6-month incubator. We've done a smaller version of that. And so I feel that that's kind of wrapped into the opportunity. First Peoples Fund evaluated data from the Native Arts Economy Building Grant Program, and this was documented in creating private sector economies in Native America. So it was a text, collaborative text. And so some of the lessons they've learned is that there are better outcomes for longer term relationships, right? So it isn't just the class, but what happens afterwards. Is there a community of practice? Is there ways to direct people to native CDFIs? Are there other small loan or lending programs that we can utilize or direct them to? We're working with Newsenda Credit Union to offer loans from 5,000 to, I think the tops, or actually it's even less than that. So it isn't a line of credit, but anywhere from $2,000 to $10,000. So again, relationship-based lending, right? This may just prime them and get them ready for this lending environment and helping them understand why they might lend, borrow money to build their business. It's also another lesson was better outcomes for leaders in orgs that uphold traditional values. So again, we really want to lean into that and pay attention to that. And yeah, this relationship-based model, right? And I think that happens with the WISTA's program, that happens with other native CDFI programs. I'm also on the board and loan committee for Native Community Capital. So we see a lot of these folks come in, right? They see a lot of the support that's offered to them through the program. They have another spin-off nonprofit that supports them as well. So yeah, I feel like part of our vision as an organization is really to bridge access to knowledge, tech, space, programs, people, and capital for Indigenous communities through economic and community development. And I think that is our role here, right? To connect with folks, to do a handoff, to celebrate wins, and to point people in the direction that will help grow their business in a sustainable way.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing that, Liz, and definitely appreciate your partnership with Change Labs and Native Community Capital as well. Yeah. But yeah, that is another example of what Sean just said about that community there working together, everybody moving forward. And speaking of everybody moving forward and bringing other folks here, Robert, you have a great expertise in policy and looking at the recent trends. So can you tell us a bit about some great, I guess, policy trends or initiatives that you've seen recently? And also, is there anything that you think that folks can do, or Congress, or maybe even the lending regulators, or anybody else, Treasury, SBA? What can folks do to make the policy better so that Native entrepreneurs have this access to capital and build these businesses?
Yeah, absolutely. And before I dive into that, I think one of the things that I want to service from some of my own work really echoes what my panelists have said so far, where in some of the research I've done, there are really two things that bubble up that are unique about the Indigenous finance industry, right? And the first is this idea of cooperation rather than competition. And then the second comes back to this relationship-based lending that my fellow panelists have talked about. And we hear that both from lenders, but also from entrepreneurs, borrowers, others. They talk about, not only does this make me feel more connected to my community, but it's, in many ways, the most helpful and sometimes the only way that I could have accessed capital and entrepreneurship, because I was either excluded from the, let's call it the mainstream financial system, or they didn't want to work with me or didn't feel comfortable in some regard. So in some of my work, what we've heard is not only is this helping entrepreneurs, but going back to the tribal sovereignty aspect of it, we've heard folks talk about, look, there are tribes that prior, 400 years ago, we would have considered each other enemies, and today we are working, in collaboration to support one another and support our entrepreneurs, as part of this broader indigenous finance effort. So it really is, I think, a statement of native sovereignty, which is just really, really powerful. In terms of the policy environment, just to quickly set the scene, over the last 4 years, we've really seen a significant influx in funding for programs to support Native entrepreneurship. It hasn't been enough, I'm sure folks on the call are thinking that, but it has been real, right? Like the CDFI fund's investment in Native initiatives has grown from 16 million in 2020 to 25 million in 2023. So that came on the tail end of years of stagnation in funding during the 2010s. Another program, the State Small Business Credit Initiative program, which passed as part of the American Rescue Plan Act, for the first time set aside $500 million for tribal entrepreneurship. So that program's providing loan guarantees and support for equity investment for states, but also for the first time for tribes as well. There were other funding avenues. I mentioned in my intro the Build Back Better Regional Challenge Program, which provided $45 million to the Mountain Plains Regional Native CDFI Coalition. That was, by some measures, the largest single investment ever made into the indigenous finance industry. And then beyond just capital, there were other federal supports, things like, policies like the Indian Business Incubators Program, which was, kind of funded for the first time recently. So look, these programs are a drop in the bucket in the size of the overall US financial sector, right? And I think my co-panelists could probably attest to the fact that even with the influx of this funding, many Native-run and Native-serving financial institutions are still oversubscribed. So that, to me, indicates that even with new funding, the level of available capital really is still insufficient relative to the overall entrepreneurial capacity in Indian country. So, like, moving forward, what do we see? Obviously, we're about to have a change in administration, right? So I think that brings both risks and potential opportunities, right? On the risk side, there's going to be policy change. Some of these programs, which right now are lifelines to tribal communities, and I should say an obligation of the federal government to tribes. Some of these programs, though, nonetheless, could be repealed. They were passed as part of big Biden administration bills in some cases, using reconciliation. They're at risk in some ways. Even if they don't get repealed outright, Congress might make appropriations decisions where they choose not to fully fund them or not to fund them at all. One example is the Indian Business Incubators Program I mentioned. This is designed to support tribal entrepreneurs. It was authorized as a 5-year program at $5 million a year. It's basically been appropriated like enough funding for one round of $2.9 million grants. So, even now you're seeing the challenge for appropriations. I worry that could get exacerbated moving forward. And then, there are questions of like personnel and capacity in the federal government even. What do the new administration's appointees prioritize? Making sure that they understand Indian country and its nuances and the government's obligations to it is going to be hugely important. I don't want to get too far out there, but the latest discussion this week is, are we going to have mass layoffs in the federal government? That will obviously create capacity issues for agencies that serve the Native finance industry. So all of these, I think we need to keep at the top of mind. What I'll say is, I think it's going to be important to ensure that Congress locks in the investments that have been made in recent years. There's some good news there. Like the likely continuing chair of the House Appropriations Committee is Tom Cole, who's Chickasaw. He has a history of supporting funding for tribes and tribal economies. Could be a key player in protecting some of these investments. And there are other risks. If you want, we can get into some of the risk related to recent federal court decisions and how that could impact programs that, as the SBA and others, right? So Obviously there are risks, but also there are some, I think, opportunities for Indian country to continue working with its allies to make sure capital access remains robust in the coming years.
Thank you. I was having a little trouble unmuting there, but Hannah, you covered a lot, and I think there's a lot to talk about here. Unfortunately, we're getting close to the end, and we have great people. I want you guys to keep talking, so I wanted to hand it over maybe back to Crystal. Is there anything else you'd like to say? Maybe it could be about some of the upcoming challenges that we'll be facing in the next 4 years. Or just more generally and broad. Is there anything else you want to say to this group?
I'll just take a minute with that. I think holistically, when we're looking at Indian country specifically, we've been through very hard times before. We've been through different administrations. So I really feel more of a collective spirit in, enforcing coordination and partnerships more now than ever. One thing I would like to say as we look at partners and individuals that are interested in helping, there's no secret key to working in Indian country, to reaching out and wanting to participate, provide capacity, provide, lending. We really need investments. We're open to these partnerships, and sometimes the rural nature of a lot of our respective organizations, those aren't necessarily facilitated on a wider level. So I would just anticipate when you're in the rooms, when we're looking at federal policy, when we're looking at access to capital, think about Native communities. And if there's not a Native in the room, speak up and say something. We won't mind.
Thank you, Crystal. Awesome. Well, I want to ask the same question of Sean. Is there anything else you want to add, share with this group, and any additional thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that you're really starting to see is, as we found out, the native CDFI was established to do some very basic things, just provide some simple capital to well-deserved folks. But you're really starting to see how the native CDFI is beginning to evolve. You're seeing that the capacity that they have. You're seeing like again with OWISTA being a national intermediary, you have other native CDFIs that are involved with new markets tax credits, with bond guarantee program. A lot of native CDFIs are having access to the components of the green gas reduction fund. Working with tribal economic development entities. And those are not, necessarily designed for the tribal citizen themselves, but it's providing capacity and access. It's creating more relationships. It's creating more resources, more connections. And you never know when those connections are going to become available, and helps out, a small mom and pop, native entrepreneurial business, and how it can have a connection to an economic development group, or a larger project that one of those other capacities might serve. So you're seeing that the native CDFI is a successful model, and you're seeing that it's not just a simple, programmatic organization. It has a lot of capacity, and it has the ability to adapt and be resourceful and really extend that reach in so many different areas. And that's exciting, because I mean, there's a lot of opportunity out there for tribes, tribal organizations, tribal citizens. And like Crystal mentioned, I mean, we're a huge catalyst for that. And there's really no ceiling as to where we can go and what we can do, and truly what that benefit can look like.
Well, thank you, Sean. I appreciate that, and definitely appreciate the work you're doing in Michigan and Indiana. Thank you. Liz, I got the same question for you. Any additional thoughts, anything you want to share with the group?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I guess I wanted to just say that really we're doing this. Who is our client? Who's our customer? Who are we supporting? It is Native business owners. It's Indigenous business owners. And I feel that these stories have a ripple effect, right? It is not just them and their business. It is their family. It is their clan. It is their community. We had Tina Archuleta went through our program, and she's the owner of Vitality plant-based wellness. So she went through a 6-month program, the accelerator program. She was the second to the last class. We want to continue to get that funded, by the way. But shortly after she finished the program, she had an opportunity to speak at RES, doing the path to a Native entrepreneurship or something like that. So we had a longer session. She came up. She's like, okay, I'm just going to say yes. I haven't done this. She spoke to 120 people. She'd never done that before. She comes back and she's a part of our community of practice, talking to other people in other programs. So, and she has a brick and mortar now, right? She's right across the street from a cultural center. She borrowed from a Native CDFI. Like, she is a testament, and she really is representative of what is possible, right? And she has, right, an informal network that is helping her at times when needed. So yeah, I think it's important just to remember those folks and the impression and the effect and the impact you're having in these communities. It is not just singular, it's not individualistic, it really is geared toward community.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Liz, and that's a great example of Miss Archuleta. And you're right, you have one entrepreneur in that community that shows the next kid that this is possible. It's like, but or if you don't grow up in a community that's not possible, or if you grow up in a community where there's a lawyer next to you, like, oh, there's a lawyer next to my neighbor or a banker next to me, but that's not the case in a lot of places. So the more folks we can do that. And the other thing about Native CDFIs is that means folks like you and Sean are living in these communities, and you guys are leaders too. And I know that in my interactions with these Native CDFIs. So appreciate what you guys are doing. And Robert, thanks for mentioning Mr. Cole. I think Tom Cole's been great on a lot of our issues. And I think Lisa Murkowski and a few others will be looking out as well. Any final thoughts, Robert?
Just one, I think when it comes to Native people, I do worry that there's a misunderstanding of Native identity still in the US, which I just see as a risk to programs designed to support Native entrepreneurship. You saw that a bit last year with the Supreme Court's ICWA case. There were at least several justices that seemed ready to strike it down because they believed it was an unconstitutional racial preference. So I think when we talk about the intersection of policy and Native people, we do need to do a better job, and not Native people themselves, but the US at large need to do a better job of framing about how we talk about it, broadening the understanding of Native people being based on citizenship and in a government to government relationship and not just race. I think that matters for data too, right? Federal government counts us as a race in their data collection. And I think that perpetuates this lack of understanding. So really, I think the US needs to do a better job of framing how they classify and talk about us to really help policymakers and the general public understand this government to government relationship.
Thank you, Robert. You're spot on. And I know that Lori mentioned the lack of data before about Native people. And then on top of that, if people are, there are lots of challenges there, self-identification and we saw it in some of the exit polls too. And it's a challenge that we see about Native businesses. So I'm excited about people identifying that. Folks like AEO, I'm thankful for you all for providing this opportunity and also highlighting some of these challenges. And I think that we have a lot of work to do, but we have some really great people here to do it. And the Native CDFIs and researchers here are the ones that I look to first. And for November is Native American Heritage Month, but I think for everybody here on this panel, it's 12 months of the year. So thank you. And thank you, Natalie. I appreciate the time.
Hey, thank you all so much. I want to give my own round of applause for all of our speakers and our moderator. What a fantastic discussion. Huge thank you once again to all of our panelists, to AEO, as well as the team for putting on the webinar and creating the fantastic content that's been going out. And thank you all for attending and joining us today. Before we wrap up, I just want to remind you all to stay connected with AEO, check out our upcoming events. We can actually drop a link right now to register for the next webinar, as well as our website to get updates for any important events or new resources that come out. We have dropped links in the chat to sign up for our newsletter. And we also dropped some links earlier in the event about our fact sheet and things you can download if you haven't, so you don't lose them. Otherwise, you could find them on our website. And once again, thank you all for being a part of an important conversation, and have a wonderful rest of your day.